Is that good? That's coming through, everybody? Nice. So, yeah, thanks everyone for joining. I'm Finley. I'm an aerospace engineer. I'm part of Safe Landing. We're a community for aviation workers that care about sustainability and want to empower each other to push our sector to go faster on reducing its climate impact. And we do that in all sorts of different ways. We're a group that's open to any aviation worker. If you're an engineer, an air traffic controller, a pilot, cabin crew, you work in an airport, you work for an airline, you work in a factory. We're keen to hear from you, from your perspectives, and to learn from you, and get your thoughts. And what we try and do in Safe Landing is we try and have as many of these open discussions as possible. We know that we don't have all the answers, but we can get closer to where we want to be on our journey if we learn from each other and we do so in an open way, in a collaborative way. So this is our website, this is our email address here, and we'll also share this slide pack after, and please get in touch if you want to continue the discussion afterwards as well. Or if you're watching this recording on YouTube and you want to have a discussion with us, please reach out. So just a bit on our group, when we founded the group, we just came up with a set of principles that guide the group, and a set of things that we can agree on collectively. So as aviation workers, we believe that our industry should be honest about the total environmental impact of flying. This often doesn't happen. We often play it down. We often say we're only a small part. We should focus on other sectors first. We want to be honest about that. We also want to be realistic about the limits of technology to solve the problem. There's a lot of kind of techno-optimism in the sector, particularly around the fuels that can be used. And we want to be realistic about that. We think it's really important that we are open about that as well. We also think we should be transparent about what future regulations or policies are required. In the absence of technology being able to solve this itself, we'll need some policies. Those are vital. And then we want our leaders to have a plan. When we say leaders, we mean political leaders, but also corporate leaders. They need to account for this, and they need to have a plan that's robust and that supports workers during that transition. So based on those principles, we've come up with a set of positions, the kind of top level positions. So we believe that flying does have a high environmental impact. It's also highly inequitable, which means it's unfairly distributed. It's only sort of 2, 3, 4% of people that produce most of aviation emissions every year. 1% of people produce half of all aviation emissions. So it's really quite a big economic and climate injustice. Technology won't be available at scale in the time required, which is really the next 10 to 15 years at most. So when we have a discussion about technology, we need to have a timescale in mind. That timescale is the next decade, and that means most technology and fuels will not be available at scale. So future regulations are vital. That includes difficult conversations about limiting air traffic capacity, and that's what we're going to get into today. Acknowledging this and planning for this, we believe, is in all of our best interests. Society at large, the planet, the environment, but also the sector itself and aviation workers ourselves. And that's why we want to have these sometimes difficult and challenging discussions, is because we think it's in our self-interest. So we're going to cover industry growth today. And one thing I want to just do is make sure that I can also, yeah, cool. Industry growth is, as I say, like a difficult problem for us to discuss. I have experience of discussing this within my own company and it being very challenging, people just not wanting to even talk about the subject. And that's why I'm really glad that I found Safe Landing and we can have these discussions. So we're going to cover, firstly, the projected growth of aviation, our position on industry growth. I'm going to summarize that, have a discussion of our positions, and also a discussion of communication methods and how we communicate this with others. I'm just going to stop sharing for 1 second so I can check the, okay, just checking there wasn't anyone in the room. I'm going to go back to sharing again. So let's start off. on the agenda. So the projected growth of air traffic. Um, Historically, air traffic has doubled every 15 years. This is historic air traffic here. You can see since about 1990, it's doubled up to the mid 2000s, and then it doubled again before COVID over the 2000s and 2010s. Now, we obviously had COVID. After then, we had a dip in air traffic, but we're very much returning. We've already returned to 2019 levels, and we're heading back to business as usual growth. This chart here, which covers the next 20 years, is from Airbus's global market forecast that was released a month ago. So this is up to date. They're projecting that we're going to get back on an 8% year growth until 2027, and then from 2027 to 2043, a kind of 3.5 to 4% compound annual growth rate of aviation. Now, this is basically an exponential growth rate, as we'll get on to in a second. And you kind of saw that there. You saw this kind of very steep growth rate happening. And basically what Airbus and Boeing and everyone else in aerospace is saying is that this growth is inevitable, it's baked in, it's happening. So basically what we had is we had air traffic doubling every 2 years. Obviously, then we've had a dip. Airbus was projecting that growth was going to continue up until the 2040s and beyond. What happened though is we had a dip in air traffic in obviously the early 2020s due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Now we're saying we wanted to return to that business as usual growth again. Now, just having a look at the numbers here, again, this is a pack from Airbus. Currently in service, we've got just over 24,000 aircraft, single aisle and twin aisle, short haul, long haul aircraft. And they're saying by 2043, so in 20 years' time, we're going to have doubled that to over 48,000. Some of the aircraft, 5,000 or about 6,000 of them will be the aircraft that are in service today. They're going to replace 18,000, or they're going to add an additional 24,000. Basically the same amount that is in service today will be added on top, and by then we're going to double within the next 20 years. Does that seem sensible in a climate emergency? That's a question we have to ask ourselves, and we'll be asking ourselves today. I wanted to include this slide as well because often we talk about actually there's an element of climate justice or social justice to expanding aviation. There's tourist-dependent economies that are relatively low in economic development. We need to improve their economic development by expanding air traffic there. And that's why we need to expand airports in the UK or Europe or North America. But if you just have a look at where this growth is coming from, sure, you've got 9,500 from People's Republic of China, but you've got about 8,000 from Europe. It's of a similar magnitude. Again, you've got sort of 9,000 from Asia Pacific, not including China. That is the big growth area, but you've also got 7,000 just from North America alone, Canada and America. If you have a look at South America and Africa, the growth is not happening there over the next 20 years. So if we were serious about this, I think you'd see a better distribution and less in countries in North America and Europe, Middle East, where we fly a lot already, and more in these places. So I think you can see not only is there air traffic growth and it's massive and it's quite scary looking, but also that it's happening not in the regions of the world that maybe need it most when we make that argument. And I think that's important as well. So what are our positions on industry growth? Well, we're really concerned about this. We think it's really dangerous. Just a few people in the waiting room I'm just going to let in. So just give me a second. There you go. Hey, everyone that just joined. We've just set the context on air traffic growth, looking at Airbus's latest market forecast, seeing that air traffic is projected to double over the next 20 years. And I'm just going to get into our positions on that. So the first thing is the only metric of importance is CO2 going into the atmosphere, as well as non-CO2 that also causes global warming. If you have a look at this chart, it's going up and up and up and up. There'll be a dip due to COVID, but we're heading back on the same trajectory. We think this is a dangerous trajectory, And to use an aviation term, we think we need to set a new flight path. So what's causing this? Well, it's being driven directly by air traffic growth. Obviously, aviation efficiency has been improving. We like to talk about this all the time. I was an aerospace engineer working on more efficient engines. So kilograms of CO2 per kilometer, that is fuel efficiency. That's the light blue line. Over the last 50 years, that has been coming down. It's been improving. Fuel burn and emissions per kilometer have been getting better. Great. However, air traffic growth has been 5 to 8% per year. And you saw the slide from Airbus saying it's going to return to 8% per year over the rest of this decade. Now, that has led, despite the efficiency improvements, and in fact, possibly because of them, because we've made flying cheaper and more accessible, it's actually just supercharging the emissions, and CO2 has been growing. Now, historic aircraft efficiency improvements have led to total emissions increasing, not decreasing. This will continue into the future unless air traffic growth is constrained in some way. And certainly business as usual air traffic growth of conventional aircraft burning conventional jet fuel. So something in safe landing that we really want to drive home is we're in an emergency right now. Most governments declared a climate emergency more than 5 years ago, but we haven't really changed much. We talked a lot, but our actions have not changed. We want to use, using an aviation analogy, there's a fire warning signal in the cockpit. We need to respond to that in a credible way, in a way that actually is evidence-based, is free from bias, and preserves risk. Mitigates risk to preserve life. So I want to just introduce a concept that is very important, which is that of a carbon budget. I'm not sure if this animation is going to work. So let me just see. It's the latest one. Yeah, there you go. So if we want to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees C, we've got a carbon budget. We've been putting carbon in the atmosphere for the past 150, 200 years. And as the concentration of CO2 has been increasing, the temperature has been increasing. It's just quite simple physics. We've only got a very small amount of that budget left, about 8%. And that, for a 50% chance of 1.5, will be exceeded in 7 years. 7 years. So that is the context that we've got here, less than a decade. If I just switch, this was an older animation. So with that in mind, let's look at our industry strategy. You've probably all seen a chart like this. You've seen that we're talking about some technology improvements, some operational improvements, a lot of sustainable aviation fuel, which we've run a lunch and learn on, and we're really concerned that actually most SAF is not sustainable, and some offsetting or negative emissions, which we've also run a lunch and learn on. But you can see there's a big area under this curve, and what is not taken account of in these industry roadmaps is a carbon budget, and the fact we're going to blow the budget in the next 10 years, and what happens after that point is largely irrelevant. Even if all of this stuff works, everything under the curve here is carbon that's been put into the atmosphere. So we've redrawn this diagram showing a carbon budget and showing that basically you need to reduce emissions today. You need to get to zero emissions by mid-2035. And even if all of the optimistic assumptions in ATAG's roadmap come to fruition, we're still going to overrun the budget by more than twice. So there's a real lack of actually talking about the carbon budget, and we think this is a major risk in aviation strategy. So what are we concerned about? What's going to happen when that carbon budget is depleted? Well, we think that there will be a sudden reduction, enforced reduction in air traffic. We think we will have no choice in 10, 15 years' time. We suspect there will be a bunch of things happen. That the science is telling us there will be crop failures, there will be sea level rise, there will be severe storms, crop failures, mass migration of people away from areas where there's no food, that are too hot to survive, towards cooler places. That will likely result in conflict. It will likely result in large economic impacts that will be so huge that we simply can't avoid them. And policies that are such as reduce it, like limiting road traffic and air traffic, um, will be very, very probable. Now, if that is unplanned, then and we get a sudden enforced reduction in air traffic while we've been when we've all been doubling air traffic, there'll be large losses to airlines, to airports, to aviation companies. They will cut their losses by cutting jobs, reduced employment, terms and conditions, stranded assets, everything that happened during COVID, but much worse, because this isn't something that's temporary, this isn't something we can find a vaccine for. The climate crisis might be permanent, might be irreversible. And we are really concerned that in 20 years' time, very few people will be able to fly. Air traffic as we know it will be something that only elites can do, that is really restricted to, kind of like medical flights, emergency flights, political flights, and actually the world becomes a smaller place and a less connected place, and we lose all of the great benefits that we can get from aviation and that we benefit from as aviation workers. So just to kind of illustrate this in a simple way, we've obviously had historic growth of air traffic. We've had COVID-19 crash. We're now talking about business as usual growth recovery. We are really concerned about this climate crash happening. And possibly if we have a planet that is still habitable after this, and that's obviously fingers crossed, possibly we can rebuild with zero emissions aircraft at that point once they're developed. But what we'd much rather see, and what safe landing is all about, is thinking about an alternative, safer trajectory where we do less in the short term in order to preserve our ability to still fly in the future. This is about moderating, doing something in moderation to continue as long as possible and to actually give us more time to adapt, to transform the sector towards low carbon flight, to give us more time to develop that technology that we simply don't have time for in 7 years. We think we should be much more sensible about growth today, and maybe even have a period of degrowth. Obviously, exactly how much that is a matter for debate, and it is just a discussion we think we need to be having, and this is an illustration. Now, we've got various ways of communicating this. This is a little cartoon I made in the past. I'm kind of saying, we're aviation workers. We're kind of at the wheel behind the aviation industry. Imagine us like a car driving up a hill. The CEO, our business leaders are telling us to keep on accelerating, build more aircraft. The faster we drive, the more aircraft we produce, the higher our share price rises before I jump out with all the money and when I leave the company in a few years' time. As workers, we're saying accelerating seems a little dangerous right now. Should we not slow down, find another way across, maybe a different flight path towards a safe landing? And the CEO is saying, no, put your foot down. We can't predict the future. We don't know what's going to happen. And keep on driving. Let's keep on making more money right now. We're really worried that we're approaching this cliff edge and we're going to fall off. We're going to experience an industry crash, and that's going to be unrecoverable. So there's different ways of communicating this. I can tell you some more, but I'm really keen to hear your thoughts as well. So what do we think we need to do about this? Well, just a few points. We think we need to challenge false solutions like greenwash because it distracts us from the task at hand, and it means we spend all of our time discussing things that simply just not going to work in time. This is an emergency. We need to park some things. We need to focus on what's important. Demand real solutions. Those are the policies that we discussed. We've got a variety of ideas of how those could be produced. Frequent flyer levy, jet fuel taxation, ways to do that equitably, but we need to have that conversation, and currently that conversation is not being had within politics. It's not being had within the COP process. We need to form citizen-led and worker-led movements to push for those policies. We can't expect political leaders or business leaders to have this conversation without being forced, because they do not take into account long-term risks. They're just focused on a short-term share price and short-term economic benefit to the economy. We need to prepare ourselves either way for change, because this is happening. It's physics, it's economics, it's unmovable, and we're approaching it. We need to get ready ourselves regardless of what our leaders are doing. Just a couple of ideas about ways that we can limit air traffic while preserving as much aviation as possible is we need to optimize for minimum energy use. This means we'll likely fly less far. less fast, and less frequently. But actually, we could by using less energy and by producing less emissions, we could produce more jobs and allow more people to travel. This means flying as efficiently as possible. So in a fixed wing, if you're doing electric or hydrogen aircraft, fixed wing aircraft as efficient as possible, not vertical takeoff and landing. Slower propeller powered aircraft rather than private jets that fly as fast as possible with a jet engine. Um, and fly less frequently. So this was a study we've been involved with. We looked at the UK. If we want to reduce our emissions along the lines of the Paris Agreement, we need to reduce air traffic by 36% by 2030 relative to 2019. But actually, you could do that by not targeting 77% of the population, the vast majority. You just need no one to take more than 4 return flights in a year. And if anyone takes between 2 and 4, to take 1 less. And you do this. So this is not about like massive draconian restrictions on people's travel for the time being. If we take this action, obviously if we wait 10, 15 years, we might just say no one can fly. So this is the sort of thing that we are asking for. The other thing when it comes to flying less far and less fast, if we have a slower, more distributed air travel network, if smaller aircraft, longer flight times, that means more employment and more work per passenger kilometer. So even though we are reducing air traffic, we could get a rebound in employment because there's more smaller aircraft. They're flying slower, they take longer to get somewhere. That could also mean better equity of access to air travel. You might start to see like relatively short range, but cheaper flights that are electric, for example. And that could really open up access to air travel, for example, in Africa or South America, where they struggle at the moment. But it means a really different type of air transport network, different types of aircraft, and different airports. We're expanding our airports at the moment for conventional aircraft, not for this. So I will stop there, but just before I do, I've just got a couple of points that I think I'll put these in the chat as well, but it's things I'd like to discuss with you. So really keen on what you think about this safe landing position on aviation's growth. If you think we've got it wrong, we shouldn't be concerned. If you think that it should grow because of the economic benefit or the social justice benefit, really keen to hear your perspective. We want to know how you think this kind of impacts on aviation workers. We want to understand how you think we can address this topic within the workplace, within your company, within your trade union, within politics, and within the media, the way that people talk about this in public. So how should we best communicate our positions as well? And how do you do it when you're talking to your friends, to your colleagues, to your family? How do you get across this idea that actually we need to fly less, but that is good for aviation, it's good for aviation workers, and it's good for the planet in a way that doesn't alienate them or put them off? So I'll stop there and I'll stop recording. So yeah, thanks for listening to me. Let me just go to